what Olaf Caroe's The Passing of Alexander reveals about Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa, its peoples, and its geography in 330 BCE. In Chapter 3 of the Patans, Olaf Caroe accomplishes something remarkable. He transforms a sparse chronicle of military manoeuvres into a living portrait of a landscape and its peoples. Through meticulous synthesis of classical sources, primarily Arrian's Anabasis, supplemented by Strabo, Curtius and Ptolemy, and informed by decades of administrative experience on the ground, Caroe reconstructs Alexander the Great's brief but dramatic passage through what is now eastern Afghanistan and northern Pakistan. What emerges is not merely a campaign narrative, but an illumination of deep continuities. The river systems, mountain passes, fortified strongholds, and tribal dynamics that remain recognizable nearly 2,400 years later. This essay integrates Caroe's dual purposes, topographic reconstruction and ethno-historical analysis, into a unified examination. By following Alexander's route through modern geographical names, tracing the identities of the peoples he encountered, and assessing the campaign's ephemeral political impact against its lasting documentary value, we can understand why Caroe regarded Alexander as a bird of passage, whose real value lies in revealing the frontier's enduring structures rather than in any transformative conquest. Part 1. The Routes and Landscapes. Topography as Living History. Caroe's signal achievement is his ability to anchor ancient movements in modern geography. Alexander crossed the Hindu Kush in spring 327 BC, and the precise passes he used remain identifiable. The main army likely traversed either the Kawak Pass, elevation 11,600 feet, or the Kaushan Pass, reaching the Alexandria he had founded near Kapisa/Bagram, identified with Jabal Saraj in the Kui-Daman north of Kabul. From there, the descent toward the Kabul River brought the Macedonians into a landscape that would test their engineering skills and tactical flexibility to the utmost. From the Hindu Kush to the Kabul Plain, the strategic logic of Alexander's route becomes apparent when mapped onto modern geography. Rather than take the direct route down the Kabul River through the Khyber Pass, which he entrusted to Hephaestion and Perdiccas, Alexander himself chose the northern path through the hill country. This decision reflected both tactical calculation and the ecological realities of the frontier. The northern valleys offered better resources for foraging, river crossings were easier nearer their sources, and the route allowed Alexander to subdue resistant hill tribes who might otherwise threaten his supply lines. From Nicaea, likely located at modern Behram near Jalalabad in the Nangarhar Plain, the army divided. Hephaestion and Perdiccas marched toward the Indus through the land of Puteolaotis, Pushkalavati, modern Charsada near Peshawar, while Alexander took the hillier northern route through what is now Bajor and Swat. This division reveals Alexander's grasp of frontier logistics, two parallel axes of advance, mutually supporting, each adapted to different terrain. The river systems, Kofan, Chuis, Uaspla, and Guraeus. The rivers Caroe identifies remain central features of the frontier landscape, and their classical names map precisely onto modern watercourses. The Kofan is the Kabul River above its junction with the Khyber route. The Chus, likely the Alishang River, drains the southern slopes of the Hindu Kush. The Uaspla is the Kunar River, which Caroe notes contains the Iranian root aspa, horse, in its name, a linguistic fossil preserving evidence of ancient Iranian speech in the region. The Guraeus is the Panchkora River, which flows south through Dir district before joining the Swat River. Alexander's path took him through the Kunar-Panchkora watershed, near the modern Durand line, into Bayal, across the Panchkora, through Talash, over the Katgala Pass into the Swat Valley at Chakdara, and onward toward the Peshawar Plain. Caroe notes that the Khyber was not the only, or necessarily the easiest route. Alternative paths via Kama, Lalpura, the Momand country, or the Shilman valleys were equally viable, reflecting the multiplicity of corridors that have long connected Central Asia to the subcontinent. The fortified cities, Masaja, Bazira, Ora, and Ornos. The siege sites Alexander encountered are not merely names in Arrian, they are places Caroe could walk and which modern travellers can still identify. The identification of these sites owes much to Orlstein's explorations in 1926, which confirmed earlier conjectures by British officers like Cunningham and Abbott. Masaga, described by Curtius as the greatest city in those parts, Caroe plausibly locates near the Kutgala Pass, barring the Talash-Adinzai route. The site featured a stream moat, ravines, and ancient ruins, defensive features that required Alexander to construct a mole, an earthen ramp, across the ravine to assault the walls. During this siege, Alexander suffered an arrow wound to the leg, prompting his Homeric quip that his attackers would find blood, not ichor, flowing from his veins, a joke that reveals much about Alexander's self-fashioning as a new Achilles. Bazira stood on a very lofty eminence, strongly fortified on every quarter. Modern scholarship identifies Bazira with Barikot, a site in the Swat Valley that has yielded substantial archaeological remains from the Hellenistic period. Its defenders trusted to the strength of their position, a pattern Caroe recognises as characteristic of frontier warfare, where hilltop strongholds provide refuge and allow communities to abandon lowland settlements when threatened. Ora, captured at first assault, is identified with Udagram, another Swat Valley site. The fall of Ora triggered a strategic withdrawal. The defenders of Bazira, learning of their neighbours' capture, fled at dead of night to the Rock of Ornos, a mountain redoubt so formidable that Alexander was seized with an ardent desire to capture it. The Rock of Ornos has proven more elusive to identify, but the consensus places it either on Mount Mahaban, on the border between Buna and Swabi districts, or at Pirsar on Mount Una near the Indus. Cunningham argued for Ranigat in Buna, while Stein preferred the Pirsar location. What matters for Caroe's analysis is not the precise peak, but the pattern it reveals, a pre-existing refuge known to the local population, to which communities retreated in times of extreme danger. The rock was not a natural fortress Alexander discovered, but a strategic point the Assasseni had already prepared. Part 2. The peoples, tribes, identities, and the problem of continuity. Caroe is cautious yet insightful about ethnic and tribal identities, far more cautious than many later writers who have sought to project modern Pashtun identities directly onto ancient populations. His analysis of the three main tribal groups Alexander encountered, the Aspasii, Gurai, and Assassini, exemplifies his methodological rigour. The Aspasii, Hippasi, the horse people of Kunar and Bayar. The Aspasii inhabited the region on both sides of the divide that now carries the Durand line in Kunar and Bajar. Strabo calls them Hippasi, a Greek translation that provides a crucial etymological clue. The Avestan Persian word for horse is aspa, the modern Persian asbi, and Pakhtu retains aspa, horse, mare. Strabo's translation proves he recognized the meaning of the tribal name. The Aspasii were the horse people. Caroe draws a further, more speculative connection. In Yusufzai Pashtun tradition, villagers often refer to themselves not as Yusufzai, but as Isapzai or even Asapzai. One of the Khans of Hoti suggested to Caroe that, with the advent of Islam, his ancestors decided to assimilate an old word to the scriptures, transforming Asap or Isap into Yusuf, Joseph. The phonetic shift from P to F is common in Pashto dialects. The Afridi pronunciation provides parallels. Caroe offers the equation cautiously. The equation cannot be proved, but it is attractive to see in the Aspasia of Arrian and the Hippasia of Strabo the prototype of the Isopsi of today. The linguistic evidence supports the possibility. The name of the Kuna River appears in Greek sources as both Euaspla and Kouaspes, both containing the aspa root. Caroe argues this helps establish that a form of Iranian tongue using the hard pronunciation was current in Kunar as long ago as the time of Aristotle and Alexander. The Aspasii, like modern Yusufzais, spoke a hard variant of Iranian tongue. The Asakeni, Asvaka, the Indian horsemen of Swat. The Asakeni of Swat present a different linguistic affiliation. The Sanskrit word for horse is Asva, and a tribe named the Asvaka appears in the Mahabharata as the barbarous denizens of the far north. The Sanskrit Asvaka becomes Asvaka in Prakrit, leading directly to the Greek transcription Asaseno. Where the Aspasi represent the Persian, Iranian word for horse, the Asaseni represent the Indian, Sanskrit word. A linguistic boundary that suggests the cultural frontier between Iran and India lay somewhere between the Kunar and Swat rivers, possibly along the Panchkora. Caroe notes that later records establish that the inhabitants of Swat and regions east of the Panchkora retained Indian affinities until the Pathan occupation of the 15th and 16th centuries. The Asacheni were not Pashtuns, but an Indo-Aryan people, linguistically and culturally distinct from the Iranian-speaking Aspasii to their west. This distinction is crucial for understanding the ethnic landscape Alexander encountered. It was not homogeneous, but layered, with Iranian and Indian populations meeting along a frontier that ran through the very valleys the Macedonians were traversing. Later scholarship has connected the Asakeni, also called Ashvakas, to the Apraka dynasty that ruled Bajaur from the 1st century BCE to the 1st century CE. The Aprakas, known from Kharosthi inscriptions and Buddhist reliquaries, represent the continuation of this pre-Pashtun Indo-Iranian population into the early centuries of the Common Era. Their rulers bore names like Vijayamitra, Indravasu, and Aspavarmo, suggesting a blend of Indian and Iranian cultural elements that matches Caroe's description of the frontier's fluid ethnic boundaries. The Gurei, the people of the Panchkora. The Gurei are the least documented of the three groups. Their name derives from the Gurayas River, Panchkora, and Caroe notes that the river appears in the Sanskrit epic as well. No modern tribal identification suggests itself, and Caroe leaves the question open, a reminder that not every ancient name can be matched to a modern counterpart, and that populations have shifted, merged, and disappeared over 2 millennia. The problem of Pathan identity. Caroe directly challenges any simple equation of ancient tribes with modern Pashtuns. He dismisses Sir David Hogarth's implication that Arrian's list of the Persian army at Gaugamela includes Pathans and hillmen from all the range of the Hindu Kush as constructive imagination. The source text mentions only the Indian Highlanders, so-called. What Caroe offers instead is a more nuanced argument that while the specific tribal names may have changed, certain linguistic and cultural patterns persist. The hard pronunciation of Iranian speech, the chivalric, horse-centered culture, the pattern of fortified hilltop refugees. These are structural continuities that survive the replacement of one tribal confederation by another. The Yusufzais, who now dominate Swat and Bajaur, arrived in the 15th century, displacing earlier populations. But they stepped into a landscape whose defensive logic and cultural orientation had been shaped over millennia. Part 3. The political and historical significance. Transient raid, enduring legacy. Caroe firmly subordinates Alexander's raid to the longer shadow of Achaemenian Persia. The Macedonian conquest was militarily brilliant but administratively ephemeral. His officers were soon expelled by the rising Maurya Empire under Chandragupta, circa 305 BC. and Mauryan institutions drew more from 2 centuries of Persian satrapal rule than from Alexander's example. The absence of written records. Perhaps the most striking revelation in Caroe's analysis is what the peoples of the frontier did not leave behind. He states bluntly, "There is no local written record, Indian or Achaemenian, inscriptional or other, of Alexander's passage through the country. Indeed, there is no contemporary or even near contemporary Asian reference to his Indian expedition at all. This absence is profound. A people who built substantial cities, maintained fortresses, and organized tribal confederacies nevertheless left no inscription, no chronicle, no memorial of the most famous invader of the ancient world." Caroe draws the inevitable conclusion. Were it not for Arrian and the other classical sources, Greek and Latin, the very memory of Alexander's connection with Gandhara would have faded like a dream. What does this tell us about these ancient peoples? Not that they were illiterate. They may have had their own oral traditions and administrative practices, but that they did not share the Greco-Roman obsession with monumentalizing military events. Their memory was oral, practical, and perhaps deliberately selective. The conqueror who did not stay was not worth recording. The Achaemenian inheritance. Caroe notes a striking asymmetry in the sources. Herodotus, writing about the Persian Empire, drew on files and records of the Achaemenian imperial machine. He could describe the composition, origins, and languages of the peoples on the eastern frontier because the Persians had administered them for generations. Arrian, by contrast, had no such material. He was writing up the intelligence diaries of a campaign undertaken in a period of downfall of empire and consequent revolution. Alexander faced no determined resistance until he crossed the Jhelum River and met Porus of Punjab. The rulers of Taxila submitted readily because they recognized Alexander as the legitimate successor of Darius Codomanus, the heir to the Achaemenian Empire. Caroe draws a telling conclusion. Alexander was not the first or the last to be made to realize that the real limit of the Iranian region is not the Khyber Pass or even the river Indus, but a point near ancient Taxila, where the modern road and railway run through the Margala Pass. Pathans still recognize when they pass it that they are leaving or coming home. This is a profound insight into the self-conception of the ancient peoples of the region. They understood themselves as part of an Iranian cultural and political sphere, not an Indian one. The real frontier, the psychological and civilizational boundary, lay east of Taxila, not at the Khyber or the Indus. The later appropriation of Alexander, Sikandar Zulkarnain. Caroe makes a fascinating argument about the afterlife of Alexander's name among the peoples of this region. Many Pashtun tribes, notably the Afridis, claim Greek blood and point to their classical features as proof. Young Pathan warriors, Caroe observes, display strong classical profile and eagle eye, recalling Alexander himself. But Caroe rejects this as genuine descent from Alexander's army. Instead, he traces the legend of Sikandar Zulkarnain, Alexander of the Two Horns, to a much later source, the translation of Greek classics into Arabic during the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. This Greek Unani law became part of Islamic humanistic education, and only then entered the folklore of the Muslim world, including the Pashtun regions. Caroe's conclusion is striking. Until the corpus of Greek and Latin learning became available in such ways, the very existence of Alexander and his army had been long forgotten in those parts of eastern Iran and India through which he passed. The people living in the Pashtun regions today who claim Alexandrian ancestry are not perpetuating an unbroken oral tradition from 327 BC. They have adopted a legend that arrived via medieval Islamic scholarship, later attaching it to physical features that may have other origins, including earlier Indo-Greek or Greco-Bactrian admixture from the centuries after Alexander. The Greco-Bactrian interlude. Caroe is careful to distinguish between Alexander's fleeting passage and the later Greco-Bactrian kingdom, which did leave a mark. This Hellenistic state, founded 150 years after Alexander's death, extended its power to Gandhara and brought genuine Greek cultural influence to the Indus region. The evidence is archaeological and numismatic. Indo-Greek coins found at Charsada, sculpture reliefs of Roman Alexandrine artistry at the same site, and the famous Gandhara school of Buddhist art, which blended Greek and Indian elements. Yet even this lasting Hellenic presence left only the faintest of memories in local tradition. No world-shaking names like that of Alexander survived from the Greco-Bactrian period. The site of Puseleotis, Charsada, illustrates this layering. The Bala Hissar mound preserves defences overrun by Alexander in 327 BC, while the nearby Shaikan mound contains the rectilinear street plan of an Indo-Greek city from the 2nd century BC. 2 centuries of Hellenistic rule left physical traces but no enduring historical memory among the local population. Part 4. Caroe's contribution, a lens for the known ground for readers acquainted with Dera Ismail Khan, Tank, Laki Marwat, Banu, Kohat, Hangu, Peshawar, Swat and Bajor. Caroe's chapter acts as a powerful instrument. It connects classical names to living landscapes, the Kabul river system, the Peshawar Plains agricultural core, the hill refugees of Bajor and Swat, and the strategic passes that have channeled armies and traders for millennia. The multiple corridors. Caroe emphasizes that the Khyber was not the only route through the mountains. Alexander himself proved that the Kunar-Swat axis was viable for a major army, and other alternatives, through Kama, Laupura, the Momand country, or the Shilman valleys, offered additional options. This multiplicity of corridors has deep implications for understanding frontier history. No single pass could be controlled absolutely, and the region's fragmentation into autonomous valleys and hill tracts reflects this underlying geography. The fortified landscape. The pattern of settlement Caroe describes, lowland agricultural cores ringed by hilltop refuges, remains visible today. The fortified houses and Malek-led autonomy that Charles Masson observed in the 1830s echo the lofty eminence strongholds and communal resistance Caroe describes from Arrian. The same tactical logic that led the Assassini to withdraw from Bazira to Onos underlies the Pashtun practice of abandoning lowland villages during British punitive expeditions and retreating to the hills. The linguistic fossils. Caroe's attention to linguistic evidence, the Aspa root in river names and tribal names, opens a window onto the deep ethnic stratigraphy of the region, the hard pronunciation of Iranian speech, the presence of both Persian and Sanskrit terms for horse among neighbouring peoples, the survival of names like Asapzai into the Islamic period. These fragments suggest that the frontier has always been a zone of contact and mixture, not a simple corridor of migration. Conclusion. The bird of passage. Ultimately, Caroe portrays Alexander as a bird of passage, spectacular but fleeting. His real value for understanding the frontier lies in the enduring structures his campaign reveals. A mosaic of hill tribes and valley agriculturists, adept at resistance and accommodation, multiple viable routes through mountain and river systems, and a cultural frontier more enduring than any single conqueror's track. The peoples Alexander encountered, the Aspasii with their Iranian speech and horse-centered culture, the Assassini with their Sanskrit name and Indian affinities, the Gurai who remain shadowy, were not Pathans as we know them today, but they inhabited the same valleys, crossed the same passes, and defended the same hilltop refuges. Their patterns of fortified settlement, strategic withdrawal, and pragmatic negotiation with outside powers would be repeated by successive populations. The Aprakas of the early centuries CE, the Yusufzais who arrived in the 15th century, and the Pashtun tribes who confronted first the Mughals, then the Sikhs, then the British. In Caroe's hands, the passing of Alexander becomes far more than military history. It is a window onto the deep geography and human resilience of the Afghanistan-Pakistan frontier, a world that has outlasted empires while retaining its essential character. The same valleys and passes that tested Alexander's phalanx later hosted Sayyads granting safe conduct, Maliks offering hospitality, and communities balancing feud with collective defence. The conqueror passed, the landscape and its peoples remained. Works cited: primary classical sources, as cited by Caroe, Arrian, Anabasis Alexandri, books 3-5, Curtius Rufus, Quintus, Historiae Alexandri Magni, Strabo, Geographica, Ptolemy, Geographia. Modern scholarship: Caroe, Olaf, The Pathans, 550 BC to AD 1957. London, Macmillan, 1958. Chapter 3. The Passing of Alexander. Bellew, H.W., An Inquiry into the Ethnography of Afghanistan. Woking, Oriental University Institute, 1891. Cunningham, Alexander, Ancient Geography of India. London, Trubner and Company, 1871. Stein, Oral, Alexander's Track to the Indus. Oxford, Clarendon Press, 1929. White House, Ruth D., The Macmillan Dictionary of Archaeology. London, Macmillan, 1983. Online resources: Aprica, Wikipedia, sourced from Salomon, Richard, Ancient Buddhist Scrolls from Gandhara, Pusiliotis, Charsada, Livius.org, 327 to 326 BC Campaign of Alexander the Great, globalsecurity.org, Appendix 2, Chronology of the Indian Campaign of Alexander the Great, from Jackson A.V. Williams, History of India, ibiblio.org,